The city lights had just begun to flicker when Lena Parker stepped out the back door of the company building, clutching her worn-out coat and faded purse. The night was cold, and the wind sliced through the streets of Chicago like a blade. She crossed the sidewalk with tired steps, dodging hurried pedestrians and loud cars. In the corner, by the entrance of the neighboring building, as always, sat the man with the thick beard, dirty clothes, and eyes hidden beneath a gray hood. Many people walked by, but no one seemed to see him, except her. Lena paused for a second, opened her bag, and pulled out a sandwich wrapped in foil. "It's not much, but it's fresh," she said with a timid smile. The man lifted his eyes, surprised. He didn't say a word, just nodded slowly, as if the gesture was too precious to interrupt with words. She gave a small wave and continued on her way. On her way home, Lena couldn't get his face out of her mind. There was something about that quiet presence, that silence full of untold stories that touched her deeply. She knew all too well what it felt like to be ignored, to be treated as invisible. How many times had she cleaned that luxurious reception and no one even glanced at the name on her badge? But she noticed. She always noticed those who needed to be seen. The next day, as usual, she arrived early for work, her headphones playing. Classical music, her way of building a small world where beauty still existed. Lena was a temporary receptionist, but she did everything at the company, answered calls, organized files, carried boxes. The atmosphere was cold, dominated by executives in expensive suits and fake smiles. She didn't belong to that world, and she knew it. Still, every day, she got up and gave it her all. At exactly 9 a.m., an announcement echoed through the halls like a wave. The new CEO was arriving. The former president had retired, and rumors had been swirling for weeks about the mysterious heir taking over the empire. "They say he's young and disappeared for years after his fiancée died," whispered one of the secretaries, eyes wide. "They say he's strange, reclusive, cold as ice," added another, murmuring by the coffee machine. Lena just kept typing reports, unaware that her life was about to be turned upside down. At lunch, she went down to the street as usual, sandwich in hand and eyes alert. But the man on the sidewalk wasn't there. She looked around, unsettled, as if she'd lost something she didn't know she needed. Maybe he had left. Maybe he'd never come back. She felt a pang in her chest. Strange how a stranger could be missed so deeply. When she returned, the building was more agitated than ever. People rushed about, adjusting their clothes, whispering nervously in the halls. Lena returned to her desk and prepared for the all-hands meeting that had been called. She entered the room, chose a quiet seat in the back, and stayed silent. The anticipation was almost tangible. When the door opened, everyone stood. A man walked in, followed by two aides, and a respectful silence. He wore a dark, tailored suit, but his eyes were the same. Lena's heart raced like it had been struck by lightning. It was him, the man from the sidewalk. Nathan Miller, the new CEO, was the same man she had given a sandwich to the night before. The same silent gaze, the same expression of pain hidden behind his composure. But now, without the hood and ragged clothes, he looked completely different, powerful, distant, untouchable. Still, when he saw her, his eyes hesitated. For a brief moment, Lena felt that he recognized her too. She quickly lowered her eyes, feeling her face flush. What did it mean? Why had he been in disguise? Was it a test, a game, or just some crazy coincidence? She tried to convince herself he wouldn't remember her, but the look he gave her told a different story. During the meeting, Nathan said little. He thanked everyone for being there, announced structural changes, and spoke about transparency and humanity. His words were firm, but his expression looked tired, like he carried more than just the weight of the company. Lena watched in silence, trying to understand, and deep down, something inside her stirred. Later, as he passed the reception, he paused for a second in front of her. Lena looked up cautiously, ready to pretend she knew nothing. But Nathan simply said in a low voice, "Thank you for the sandwich," and walked away. She stood still, her skin tingling. What was happening? Why did it feel like the beginning of something she couldn't name? That man was now the supreme boss of the company. Unreachable for someone like her. But in that brief moment, he had spoken from the heart, and that disarmed her. In the following days, he didn't seek her out. He seemed to avoid her, but sometimes Lena caught him watching her from the executive floor's glass walls. She pretended not to notice, but her stomach flipped every time. And while the city moved on with its relentless rhythm, something invisible formed between them, something silent but real. Nathan felt it too, even if he didn't admit it. The woman who had treated him like a human when everyone else ignored him was now the quiet employee at his own company. But getting closer to her meant facing pains he preferred to bury, and she seemed made of courage, he of fear. That night, lying in his luxurious and empty apartment, Nathan wasn't thinking about profits, meetings, or mergers. He was thinking about the kindness of a sandwich offered without judgment, about the strength of a gaze that saw beyond appearances, and for the first time in years, he wanted to be seen again. Lena got home and dropped her bag on the worn-out couch, silence filling the small apartment. Her grandmother slept in the room next door, and everything looked the same, except inside her. She sat at the kitchen table, resting her chin in her hands, her mind replaying his words, "Thank you for the sandwich." Simple, but loaded with a weight she still didn't know how to carry. Across the city, Nathan stood at the window of his apartment overlooking the lake, hands in his pockets. On his phone screen, dozens of unread messages from executives and reporters waited. But none of them mattered as much as the name he still didn't know, the name of the woman who had truly seen him. She was just an employee, just an ordinary woman. But in a world full of facades, she was the only thing that felt real. The next morning, the atmosphere at the company was tense, masked by forced smiles. Nathan had officially taken over, but he was still an enigma to everyone. Rumors about his inheritance, his years of absence, and the tragic death of his fiancée spread like poison through the halls. He disappeared for 2 years. They say he went to a retreat in Iceland, whispered one manager. Lena, overhearing from a distance, simply frowned and kept organizing files. Nathan walked silently into the executive floor, observing every detail, like someone inspecting a world he no longer recognized. The modern architecture, the glass panels, the spotless corridors, they all seemed colder than he remembered. Even though he owned it all now, he still felt like a stranger. His soul wasn't in the spreadsheets, but in the fragments of what he had lost. But there was something, or someone, pulling him back to the present. He saw her again at the front desk, answering emails, headphones in, focused expression. She seemed untouched by the luxury around her, as if that universe had no power over her. That unsettled him. Women were usually dazzled by his last name, but not her. Lena seemed bigger than the story itself. During a leadership meeting, Nathan watched the executives speak without passion. Projects, numbers, mergers, everything felt automatic. But he remembered what it was like to be invisible, sitting on the sidewalk, overhearing conversations empty of compassion. And there, in that full boardroom, he understood the empire he inherited needed more than profit. It needed purpose. It needed truth. At the end of the meeting, he asked everyone to leave, except the HR director. "I want to meet the base-level employees," he said directly. "But sir, with all due respect, that's never been done." "That's exactly why we're going to do it now," Nathan replied with a firm look. And at that moment, he decided he'd start with her. At the coffee break, Lena went down to the building's cafeteria. She sat alone with her cup of tea and a worn-out book in her lap. It was her routine diving into other stories to escape. Her own. But she didn't expect someone to sit across from her, much less him. "This place is cozier than it looks," said Nathan, trying to sound casual. Lena swallowed hard, surprised, but kept her composure. "Yeah, the coffee's strong, and no one asks questions. It's perfect for me," she replied without looking directly at him. Nathan gave a small smile, noticing her resistance. She wasn't impressed, and that made him want to stay. "Do you always eat alone?" he asked. "Most of the time. It's cheaper and quieter," she said, placing the bookmark in her book. "What story are you reading?" "One about courage, but not the kind that screams, the kind that keeps going, even when no one sees." Nathan felt like those words had been written for him. "You remember me, don't you?" he asked in a low voice. "Of course I do, but I thought we weren't supposed to talk about that." "Maybe we weren't, but I couldn't forget," he admitted, locking eyes with her. Lena sighed, crossing her arms. "I didn't do anything special. I just gave food to someone who was hungry." "You did more than that, Lena. You saw me when I couldn't even see myself anymore." She finally looked at him, not afraid, but steady. "Then why pretend to be someone you weren't?" "I needed to know who was still real in this world." "And what did you find?" she asked, challenging. You're real," he said, his voice unable to hide the truth. The silence between them was thick with tension. There was no shallow flirting, no fake smiles. There was a space of honesty being cautiously stepped into, and they both knew from here on everything would change. Nathan didn't push further. He stood up slowly, like someone respecting sacred ground. "It was nice talking to you. Can I do this again sometime?" "You can, but only if you don't come as the boss. Only as a man," she said, half smiling. He nodded, touched, and walked away. Lena followed him with her eyes, feeling she had just opened a dangerous door. In his office high above the city, Nathan looked out the window. Rivers of people rushing, cars, lights, appointments. But he was thinking about her, the woman who challenged him with simplicity. The look that asked for nothing but said everything. And for the first time, he wanted to stay. In the days that followed, Nathan started visiting the cafeteria more often. Sometimes he saw her, sometimes he didn't. But he never asked about her. He wanted every encounter to be natural, not forced. And every time they talked, a new part of him seemed to wake up, as if Lena was unknowingly rewriting a story that had once been interrupted. The executives noticed the change. He was less harsh, more present, but still surrounded by limits no one dared cross. "Do you think he's in love?" some whispered. But Nathan didn't think of it as love in the trivial sense. He thought of it as reconnection and everything he was relearning with Lena. Lena, on her part, pretended nothing was happening, but her mind wandered far from emails and spreadsheets. She replayed every conversation, every glance, and tried to protect herself from something that was already inside her, because his world was something else, and hers was too grounded. That night, when she got home, she found her grandmother running a fever. Worried, she rushed to the pharmacy and spent hours by her bedside. On the TV in the living room, a report aired about Nathan Miller and his bold new leadership. She glanced at the screen with a tight chest, because despite the social distance, he was getting dangerously close. Nathan, at that very hour, was reviewing employee files, and he paused when he saw her name. Lena Parker. He repeated it like an old verse, rediscovered, and smiled, for the first time in a long while, without fear. That night, as Chicago quieted under the cold, 2 windows remained lit in opposite corners of the city. One modest, with patched curtains and the smell of tea in the air, the other wide, glass-walled, overlooking the skyline. In both, restless hearts tried to make sense of what they were feeling. Lena pulled the blanket over her grandmother with care. Nathan stared at the sky, lost in thought. And without knowing it, both were searching for shelter in one another, even in silence. The next day fate would cross their paths again, not with the lightness of a casual encounter, but with the weight of the choices ahead. An important project would accidentally land in Lena's hands, and when she tried to return it, she'd be called into the CEO's office. For the first time, the two would face each other. No excuses, no titles, no shields. And what had begun with a hearty sandwich was about to become a story too powerful to contain. The envelope landed on Lena's desk like a stone out of place. She looked around confused and realized it wasn't addressed to her. It had the confidential stamp and the seal of the company's executive level. Must have ended up here by mistake, she muttered to herself. But when she tried to return it, she found out the direct recipient was Nathan. Hesitantly, she went up to the top floor for the first time since he had taken over. The glass walls, the silent corridors, everything felt like a sacred temple. Each step echoed with invisible judgment. When she reached the executive reception, the assistant said, "He's expecting you." Lena swallowed hard. How did he know? Nathan stood alone, leaning against the wall of the wide office, no jacket, sleeves rolled up. When she entered, he turned slowly, as if he had been waiting for hours. "You found my envelope," he said, pointing to the folder in her hands. She nodded and handed it to him, keeping her distance. "Sorry for coming up unannounced. I thought it might be important." "It was," he replied, without taking his eyes off her. "But not because of the contents." She frowned, uncomfortable with the ambiguity. "So, what do you want? From me?" "To understand how someone like you still exists in this world." Lena crossed her arms, staring firmly. "I didn't come here to be complimented, Mr. Miller." "Nathan," he corrected gently. She hesitated, but didn't give in. "With all due respect, I prefer to keep a distance between what we lived on the street and what this is here." Nathan took 2 steps closer, but didn't invade her space. "You were the only person who treated me like a human when I was at rock bottom. And now you're at the top, and I'm still down here," she replied, without raising her voice. That truth hung between them like a broken bridge. He lowered his gaze, moved by her firmness. "I don't want this to be a game, Lena, or a debt to repay." "Good, because I'm not for sale," she answered, direct. Silence fell, thick, tense, heavy. For the first time, Nathan seemed without words, and she turned to leave. But before she reached the door, he spoke. "Are you afraid of me?" She stopped, but didn't turn around. "No, I'm afraid of fooling myself into thinking you're different." And she walked out. At reception, the assistant glanced at Lena with suspicion. She just walked back to the elevator, heart pounding in her chest. It wasn't anger nor pride. It was self-protection. She knew what it was like to be used, forgotten, discarded. And she wouldn't let the most powerful man in that building break through her armor. Nathan remained in the room, frozen. Her words echoed in his mind like hammer blows. He wasn't used to being confronted, much less to being seen so clearly, and that hurt more than any rejection. In the days that followed, he tried to distance himself. He buried himself in reports, meetings, numbers, but nothing had flavor anymore. Even the cafeteria coffee she liked tasted bitter now, because what he wanted couldn't be bought. Lena also avoided crossing paths with him. She knew that if she let her heart take the lead, she would end up hurt. But every time she saw him from afar, with that restrained expression, something inside her wavered. It wasn't desire nor attraction. It was something deeper, almost ancestral. One rainy afternoon, she was in the company library, reorganizing old documents. Among the folders, she found the resume she had submitted years ago, back when she still dreamed of working in design. She ran her fingers over the words she had written with so much hope, but she had never received a response. It reminded her of everything she had left behind. Meanwhile, Nathan, on one of his anonymous nighttime walks, returned to the place where she had first found him. The same street corner, the same darkness. He sat on the ground, still in his suit, and stared into the void, because he wanted to remember what he had felt that night, and maybe find the part of himself that only Lena had reached. The next morning, a box was left on Lena's desk. No note, no sender. Inside, an art supply kit and a sheet of paper with a handwritten message. "Do you still dream?" She closed the box slowly, her eyes filling with tears. She didn't know if it was an apology or an invitation, but she knew that gesture pierced through her defenses, because there was no luxury, no power, no manipulation in it. There was only a question, and a response that perhaps she wasn't ready to give yet. Lena closed the box and put it away, like someone hiding a memory that still hurts. Deep down, she knew that question, "Do you still dream?" stirred everything she had buried to survive. But she also knew that dreams, when brought back to life, demand courage. And at that moment in her life, she didn't have space to fail again, nor time for illusions dressed in suits and guilt. Nathan, on the other hand, began to rethink his decision to keep his distance. He couldn't pretend she was just another employee, because every time he considered changing something in the company, he wondered how Lena would see it. She had become his measure of humanity, and that scared him more than any financial risk. That same week, one night, he requested to personally review old employee files. He told HR he was interested in understanding the company's foundation. But what he really wanted was to understand her, what drove Lena, what she once wanted before she had to settle for surviving. When he found her rejected design resume, his eyes stopped on one line. "I want to create things that make people feel something good, even if just for a moment." He leaned back in his chair, holding the page as if it were too fragile for the world they lived in. And he realized she didn't need promises or praise, just space to be who she was. And he wanted to give her that space. But to do that, he'd have to let go of control and learn that to love is, above all, to listen with the soul. On Monday morning, Lena arrived at the company determined to ignore any gesture from Nathan. She had tucked the box of art supplies under her bed, along with the dream she no longer dared to touch. But when she sat at her desk, she found a formal note: "Report to the CEO's office at 10 a.m. Her heart raced. Every step toward that door felt like a choice between running and facing it. She took a deep breath and walked the path she already knew by heart. Nathan was standing, holding a folder, his expression a mix of seriousness and anticipation. "Before you say anything, I just want you to see this," he said, handing her the folder. Inside was an internal project, a new design department for the company's social campaigns. In the corner printed, "Leadership Proposal, Lena Parker." Her eyes widened. She didn't know what to say. "You want to promote me?" she asked, skeptical. "I want to give you the space the system never gave you, and see what you create with freedom." Lena closed the folder carefully, her fingers trembling. "I'm not offering a favor," Nathan continued. "I'm offering the place that should have been yours from the start." She took a step back, as if the offer itself were too dangerous. "This has nothing to do with work, does it?" "It has everything to do with respect, with seeing beyond labels," he replied, not breaking eye contact. "I don't know if I can trust you, Nathan." "Then let me prove you can." Lena left the room without saying yes or no. She spent the rest of the day buried in reports, trying to silence the voice screaming inside her. At the end of the day, she took the stairs instead of the elevator. She needed space and air and time, but she had no idea time was about to be tested. That same night, an emergency meeting was called for all employees. A $1 million project was under investigation for internal fraud, and the person responsible, the marketing director, the ICE, same man who had sabotaged Lena's resume years ago. When the name was revealed, Nathan looked straight at her, and Lena understood. He had dug into the past to right a wrong. The director was immediately dismissed, Some employees exchanged surprised looks at the CEO's firm stance. Lena remained quiet at the back of the room, her heart pounding. Nathan hadn't defended her with words, but with actions. And for the first time, she wondered if maybe he really was changing. The next day, the atmosphere had shifted. A few co-workers approached Lena, offering quiet praise. She didn't respond. She was still processing everything. The power she never asked for was now being offered with respect, and that left her unsteady. At the end of the day, Nathan stopped by her desk. "Are you thinking about the proposal?" he asked without pressure. Lena gave a faint smile and nodded. "I've been thinking about it since the moment you showed up with that box." "Then keep thinking, but think with your heart," he said, and walked away. That night, Lena pulled the box out from under the bed. She spread the supplies across her small kitchen table. She began to draw, as if she were breathing again after years underwater. Each stroke was a piece of her coming back to life. And in the corner of the page, she signed, L. Parker, still dreaming. Nathan, on the other side of the city, was reviewing company projects, but his mind kept returning to her, serene, strong, unshakable. He knew there was still so much to repair, so much to earn, but he also knew he didn't need to rush anything, because real love isn't demanded, it's earned. The following week, Lena delivered her answer in silence. She left a portfolio of ideas for social impact campaigns on his desk. At the end, she had written, "If it's to create something real, I accept." Nathan smiled as he read it, and for the first time, he felt like he was building something he couldn't buy. They began working together, not as a couple, nor as boss and employee, but as partners with a purpose. The project took shape, a series of campaigns focused on minorities, inclusion, and dignity. Lena led with sensitivity and vision. Nathan supported with structure and quiet respect. Over time, a rhythm grew between them that went beyond the workplace, shared glances, silences that said more than meetings. A quiet affection grew in the spaces between deadlines, in the care behind decisions. But neither dared to name it, maybe out of fear, maybe out of respect. One day, while setting up a campaign exhibit, Lena tripped over a loose wire and fell to her knees. Nathan rushed over and helped her up. She laughed awkwardly. He held her hand a second too long. "Are you okay?" he asked, eyes locked on hers. "Yes, just didn't expect to fall. Not now. Sometimes we fall just before we find solid ground," he replied, not realizing he was speaking of himself. And in that moment, Lena felt her fear begin to dissolve. Not because of the words, but because of the way he looked at her. No rush, no pressure, just presence. Like someone waiting for the right moment, and she was beginning to hear her own heart again. On her way home that night, Lena watched the city through the bus window. The lights flickered like promises, some false, others real. She rested her head against the glass and smiled softly, thinking of Nathan's eyes. There was something in them that didn't match power, but vulnerability. And maybe that was what made her want to stay a little closer. Nathan, meanwhile, walked alone through the quiet company lobby, no tie, no hurry. He remembered the first time he saw her. Filthy, lost and yet seen by her. Now, with the world. In his hands, all he wanted was to be worthy of that look again. Because with Lena, there were no masks, and he no longer knew how to live with them. At home, Lena carefully stored her drawings and opened a diary she hadn't touched in years. Today I felt something I thought I had lost. Faith in someone. Maybe faith in myself. Maybe it's too soon, but I don't want to run. She closed the notebook and turned off the light. And even without a confession, love was already growing in the space between them. A love that was taking root, quietly but deeply, and so, without vows, without kisses, without rushed, happy endings. Something began to bloom between them. It was made of respect, of story, of everything the world around them couldn't. See? Because sometimes what truly transforms doesn't shout or shine. It simply stays. And Lena and Nathan were about to discover what that meant. Together. The following days were filled with meetings, presentations, and final tweaks to the new project. Lena had become a reference within the company. Without titles, without fanfare. Her office was still small, but now it buzzed with ideas, voices, and people eager to listen. Nathan watched from a distance, carrying a silent pride he didn't know how to name. But not everyone felt the same way. Some executives began whispering through the hallways. Since when does a receptionist become head of creation? She must be involved with Nathan. That's the only explanation. Lena heard the rumors like distant thunder. She knew a storm was coming, but she stayed firm, her whole heart in her work. Nathan noticed the subtle movements, the coldness of some directors, the sideways glances, the passive-aggressive remarks. He thought of stepping in, but Lena surprised him. "Don't defend me, let me prove myself," she said firmly. And he understood that loving her also meant trusting her strength. The campaign launched quietly and exploded. Lena's visuals portraying real stories of resilience went viral on social media. News outlets, blogs, and influencers praised the new human face of the company, but with the fame came the weight of exposure, and the past she had fought to protect was ripped into the open. A former neighbor from her childhood appeared in the media, revealing Lena's difficult upbringing. He claimed she had hidden her background to rise in life. The report implied she got close to Nathan with ulterior motives. Sensationalist headlines plastered her face. "The woman who enchanted the CEO." Lena broke down. When she saw the news, it felt like the ground disappeared beneath her. She called Nathan, but couldn't speak when he answered. She hung up before saying a word. She didn't want him to see her like that. She didn't want him to think it was all a lie. When Nathan found out, fury rose in him like he hadn't felt in years. But his first reaction wasn't revenge, it was to find her. He went down to her department, but Lena had left early. He took a cab straight to the address he'd once seen in the system. He needed to see her, look her in the eyes, hear it from her. Lena was sitting on the porch floor of her small apartment, hugging her knees. Her grandmother slept peacefully, unaware of the storm inside her granddaughter. When Nathan knocked, she hesitated, but she opened the door. His eyes were full of question and fear. "You read it, didn't you?" she asked, straight to the point. "I did, and I came to hear it from you, not the press. It's all true, the poverty, the shame. But I never tried to hide it. I just was never asked." Nathan sat beside her on the cold porch floor. "You don't need to explain anything to me, but you do need to believe you're not alone." She looked at him, surprised by his softness. "I'm not ashamed of where I come from. I'm ashamed of what people do with it." He gently held her hand. "What you've built, no one can take away, and what I feel, Lena, no one can rewrite." Tears fell. Quiet, without drama, the story went viral, but so did the support. Staff from the lower levels made a tribute video for Lena, sharing how she inspired them. Hundreds of comments defended her integrity, her story, her truth. Nathan shared the video from the company's official account with a simple caption, "True worth isn't in a resume, it's in the courage of those who never stop dreaming." The next day, Lena returned to work with her head held high. Some still whispered, but many applauded in silence. And when Nathan passed her, there were no words, just a look full of everything unspoken. Lena smiled softly. She knew she had survived the first fall. The project grew. So did the company. But most of all, the two of them began to grow. In the shadow of what they'd lost and the light of what they were building. Nathan started walking through departments more often, talking to regular employees, listening to stories. And Lena, increasingly respected, became a bridge between worlds that rarely met. But what was blooming between them remained a secret, guarded in silence. Until, on a random afternoon, Nathan called her to his office. No agenda, no spreadsheets, just a wooden box on the desk. Inside, a golden badge. Director of Human-Centered Projects, Lena Parker. She looked at him, overwhelmed. "This isn't a promotion, it's recognition," he said quietly. She took the badge with trembling hands. "And does this change what we have?" she asked, breathless. Nathan stepped forward. "It does, but only if you're ready to call it a beginning." Lena held the badge like it was more than metal, like it was dignity returned, and for the first time she felt she didn't need permission to take up space. She smiled, small but true. "If this is a beginning, let it be light, Nathan. No promises, just presence." He nodded, touching her hand gently. "That's all I know how to give right now." Outside that room, the company kept its hurried rhythm. But inside, time moved differently. Two worlds that once seemed incompatible were choosing to meet, not by fate, but by will. And Lena understood. Sometimes love doesn't arrive with flowers. It arrives with space and safe silence. That night, she walked home with a light heart. The rumors still existed, the doubts too, but something stronger had taken root. The certainty she no longer had to hide. The city was the same, but the journey no longer weighed so much. Because now she carried more than a purse. She carried the full knowledge of who she was, and that no one could take away. From high up in the building, Nathan watched her exit the lobby and disappear into the crowd. He didn't run after her, didn't call out. He just watched, with the eyes of someone who had finally learned that the most beautiful kind of love respects the other's time. Because he didn't want Lena to stay out of gratitude. He wanted her to choose to stay, whole, free, and strong. And in that quiet moment, between two footsteps that never met, a bond was born, stronger than any declaration. Something made of truth, of waiting, and everything his money had never been able to buy. Because she hadn't just been kind to a homeless man, she had been the only one who truly saw him, when even he had disappeared. Winter was approaching, and with it, a heavier air settled over the city. Lena wore a scarf and simple boots, but her gaze carried the strength of someone who had weathered the storm. Since her official appointment as director, her life had turned upside down. Meetings, interviews, expectations. But she still took the subway, still cared for her grandmother, still made her own coffee, because her worth was never in the title. Nathan, on the other hand, seemed more present than ever, and more distant at the same time. He walked the hallways with a polite smile, but his distant eyes betrayed unease. They barely had time alone anymore. The bond that had once grown slowly now stumbled over responsibilities and pressure, and the silent tension between them had begun to weigh. Lena tried to ignore it, pretend nothing was changing, but something in her closed up each time he pulled. Away without explanation, short messages, absences from important meetings, postponements without reason. She recognized the behavior of someone who was scared, and Nathan clearly was. One evening, after finishing another campaign draft, Lena went up to the executive floor. The light in his office was still on, and the door slightly ajar revealed an ongoing conversation. She heard it unintentionally, or maybe she wanted to hear. "You know she's a risk, Nathan," said a man's voice. "The media loves this kind of story." And he replied, "She's not a story. She's the only real thing here." Lena walked away in silence, her chest tightening, not because of what he said, but because of the situation. Being real in a world full of facades was a burden no one else could see. And sometimes the truest love is also the loneliest. She didn't know if she could keep being the exception. In the days that followed, Nathan tried to get closer again. He invited her to lunch, left notes on her desk, sent late-night messages, but she responded with kindness and distance, not out of pride, but for protection. She was tired of being half of everything. One Saturday, he showed up unexpectedly in her neighborhood, wearing jeans, a hoodie, and a vulnerable look. Lena was at the street market with her grandmother when she saw him standing by the flower stand. "I needed to see where you actually breathe," he said, no small talk. She smiled, but there was sadness in her eyes. "Sometimes, Nathan, it feels like you want me, but don't know how to have me." "Because I've never had anything I couldn't control," he confessed. She looked around, searching for simple words. Then, "Maybe I'm not for you, because I'm chaos, I'm human." And in that moment, they both knew they were on the edge of losing each other. He tried to explain, talk about fear, trauma, pressure, but she could only hear the silence of the past few days. "The problem isn't what you feel, it's what you do with it." And that phrase stood between them like a cracked bridge. Before he could answer, she was already gone. In the following days, Nathan isolated himself. He canceled meetings, turned down interviews, buried himself in the company's numbers. But even record profits couldn't silence her absence. And every spreadsheet row whispered the question he avoided. "Why is it so hard to simply stay?" Lena carried on with her work, strong, productive, respected. But at the end of each day, the emptiness returned. She lay awake, replaying conversations, remembering looks. She wanted him to fight, to not give up so easily. But she couldn't teach someone how to love with presence. It was during a quarterly review meeting that they saw each other again. They sat across from one another in the conference room, surrounded by executives. Lena's presentation was flawless. At the end, everyone applauded, except Nathan, who simply looked at her, eyes brimming with emotion. After the meeting, she went to the rooftop for air. The cold wind cut through, but it was better than the heat of inner turmoil. Nathan arrived a few minutes later, silently. She didn't run, but she didn't smile either. She just waited. "I'm afraid to love someone who might leave," he said finally. "And I'm afraid to love someone who doesn't know how to stay," she replied. Silence. Eye contact. Hearts pounding too loudly to ignore. "You don't need to promise anything, Nathan. You just need to be here." He nodded, his eyes wet. "I'm trying, but it's hard." "I'm scared too, but I'm still here." And there, with no labels, no guaranteed happy ending, they started again. In that moment, he took her hand, saying nothing. And for the first time, Lena didn't pull away, because real love doesn't demand perfection, only courage. And on that rooftop, amid the cold and uncertainty, a new beginning was born. They stayed there for a long time, holding hands without hurry, without pressure. The world around them kept spinning, horns, deadlines, meetings. But in that small pocket of time, Lena and Nathan allowed themselves to feel. They didn't need answers, just presence. And sometimes that's enough. When they finally came down, something had shifted between them. It wasn't official. It didn't have a name. But it was there, solid and subtle. They exchanged glances in the elevator, like two people carrying a beautiful secret. Lena knew there was still a long road ahead, but now he was willing to walk it with her. Nathan began listening to her more closely, even in the most technical meetings. Their glances were frequent but discreet, like two conspirators of something they were still discovering. She smiled with her eyes again, and he began to breathe without guilt. The chaos of the city continued, but they had found shelter, a shelter called connection, and so, without rushing, without labels, without certainty, they started over, flawed, scared, but honest. Because some stories don't need immediate endings, they just need two hearts willing to try, and theirs were beating in the same rhythm. The campaign Lena had created continued to resonate, inside and outside the company. Interviews, invitations to speak, partnerships with NGOs, everything seemed to blossom. But the greater the reach, the more exposed they became. And somewhere in the city, someone watched with sharp and envious eyes. Because not all success comes without a shadow. That Friday morning, an anonymous email landed in the inbox of a local news outlet. Forged documents, manipulated contracts, messages taken out of context. All pointed to an alleged personal favoring between Lena and Nathan. The headline exploded online. Love and corruption, CEO favors affair with employee. Within hours, chaos had erupted. Lena was summoned to an emergency meeting. She entered the room and saw serious faces, hard stares, an atmosphere of judgment. Nathan wasn't there, and his silence hurt more than the accusations. She sat down, steady, but her heart was in pieces. "Do you have anything to declare?" asked one of the board members. She took a deep breath. "Only that everything I've achieved was through hard work, and that being loved, if I ever was, never gave me privilege, only courage." The room went quiet. But Nathan's absence screamed inside her. He showed up later that afternoon, red eyes, tired face, visibly shaken. They were tracking my emails, my history, my logins. "You knew this could happen?" she asked, hurt. "Yes, but I didn't know it would hurt this much." She stood up, holding back tears. "You could have defended me, that's all." Nathan took a step forward, but she pulled away. "Lena, I was advised to stay quiet. Any move could have made it worse. But your silence already did enough damage." She left the room, crossing the lobby with her eyes fixed on the ground. Employees whispered. Cameras began gathering outside. It was like living a waking nightmare. Outside, the cold cut like a blade. But inside, it was the loneliness that hurt more. The next day, Nathan went to her home. He brought flowers, tried to explain. But Lena didn't open the door. She simply left a note on the ground. "Now I'm the one who needs silence." And for the first time, he knew what it felt like to be on the outside of the wall. The following days were long. The company released an official statement clearing both of any wrongdoing. The accusations were proven false, the documents fabricated, but emotional damage doesn't vanish with a press release, and between them, a silent abyss remained. Lena returned to work after a week. She was greeted with quiet applause and hesitant hugs, but she didn't smile like before. Trust was like a cracked crystal. Still beautiful, but fragile. Nathan gave her space. He didn't insist, didn't pressure, only waited. And in that time, he began to feel everything he'd always avoided, the fear of loss, of failure, of not being enough. And above all, the fear of loving someone he couldn't control. On a gray Sunday, he wrote her a letter by hand. He delivered it personally, without asking for a response. "Lena, I saw you before I even knew who you were. And now, after losing you, I know who I am. If there's still anything between us, I'll be waiting with no defenses." She read the letter, sitting on a park bench, as dry leaves danced across the ground. His words weren't perfect, but they were honest. And in that moment, she realized love was also this: to hurt, to acknowledge, to begin again, and to allow the other to grow, even without you. That evening, she didn't reply to the letter, but she went to the place where they first had a real conversation. She sat on the same bench and waited in silence. And when he appeared, breathless, without a suit, without a shield, she simply said, "I'm scared too, but I'm still here." Nathan sat beside her slowly. The two remained there, in silence for long minutes. And then he said, "If we're going to start again, let it be with the whole truth." Lena smiled, eyes full of tears. "Then let's begin again." They didn't kiss at that moment. There was no rush, no soap opera finale. Their presence was enough, a quiet balm. Because after everything, what truly mattered was being there. Choosing again. No promises, but with truth. Nathan began walking beside her, not ahead, not behind. He offered support without intrusion, affection without demand, time without a clock. Lena in turn began lowering her guard, slowly. She realized that loving wasn't about erasing yourself, but allowing yourself to be seen fully. And so, step by step, they rebuilt trust. The world around them kept trying to label, invade, speculate, but they learned to shield what they had with silence and daily choices. And it was in the ordinary that love grew most beautifully. In a cup of coffee left on a desk, in a note hidden among papers, in a glance during a tough meeting. The company flourished with the new project, now a model of human-centered leadership. And when Lena shared her story at public events, she always said, "I wasn't saved by a rich man. I was recognized as someone who never stopped fighting." And in the end, love is that, seeing the other when no one else does. That night, as they returned home, Nathan stopped at her door. "Can I come in?" he asked with a half smile. Lena held his hand and answered softly, "You can, but only if it's to stay, even when life gets hard again." And he entered, slowly, knowing this time it was for real. Months had passed since that quiet restart. Lena and Nathan now walked together, not like a fairy tale, but like two people who had chosen to stay. He was still the CEO. She still created campaigns that touched real people. But above all, they remained human. And that was what truly united them. Lena's apartment had gained new colors. No luxury, no excess, just warmth, art, simplicity. Nathan spent more and more time there, on the small couch, on the tiny balcony built for two, and he'd say that was the only place where the world made sense, because it was the only place where he was just a man, not a boss, not an heir. Night after returning from a charity event, they found Lena's grandmother in the living room, reading aloud to herself. Nathan sat beside her, patiently listening to every repeated phrase. Lena watched from a distance, her heart overflowing, because now she knew love isn't measured in words, but in presence, in care. On the one-year anniversary of the Social Impact Campaign, a new exhibition was held. Photos, videos, and phrases from the team filled the panels. In the center, one blank canvas bore only a single handwritten line, "Do you still dream?" And below, the signature, L. Parker. The audience was moved. The press praised it, but Nathan, standing before the canvas, saw more than art. He saw the beginning of everything, the question that changed his life, and the woman who had the courage to ask it. At the end of the event, he stepped onto the stage, unscripted. He took the microphone, looked at Lena in the audience, and drew a breath. They say CEOs don't fall in love, that they don't have time, or soul for that, but I'm here to say they're wrong. Then he pulled a small box from his pocket. A hush swept through the room. Lena's eyes widened, her heart racing. Nathan stepped down from the stage and walked toward her. He knelt slowly, surrounded by lights and stairs, and said, "I don't have a perfect world, but I have the courage to choose you every day." Lena cried, laughing through the tears, not because of the ring, not because of the gesture, but because for the first time someone saw her fully and loved her, even with the broken pieces. She knelt down, held his face in her hands, and whispered, "Yes, with all that I am." The wedding was small, intimate, surrounded by people who had seen them rebuild. No luxury, but filled with emotion. They didn't promise forever, just to show up in good times and bad. And in the makeshift altar of a garden with string, lights, they sealed a love that didn't begin with promises, but with a sandwich and a glance. The company kept growing, but now it had a soul. Lena led new social projects and mentored underprivileged youth. Nathan, lighter now, shared decisions and made space for real ideas. Together they founded an NGO that offered scholarships to creative young people from low-income backgrounds. They named it Inizio, beginning, because that's what Lena had given him one day. Years later, on an ordinary afternoon, Nathan was making coffee in their small kitchen while Lena sketched on the balcony. The grandmother slept, with the old radio playing softly in the background. And in that quiet rhythm of routine, there was a peace, money, could never buy. Because they hadn't conquered the world, they had conquered fear. One evening, sitting on the couch, Lena held an album filled with old clippings. She showed Nathan the headline that had nearly destroyed them. He laughed, surprised she'd kept it. A reminder of when love had to fight to exist, she said. And he held her even tighter. On the next pages were photos of trips, projects, genuine smiles, no filters, no perfection, but a real story. And that was what held them together. Because love that endures puts down roots. The last clipping in the album was a photo of them in front of the NGO headquarters. Lena held a child in her arms. Nathan smiled beside her, painted on the wall in big letters. Sometimes one gesture is enough to change everything, and they knew that gesture was a sandwich and the decision to see one another. On the balcony, the sun began to set. Lena rested her head on Nathan's shoulder. He held her hand in silence, and in that moment there was no fear, no doubt, no past, only the certainty that love had chosen to stay. The next morning, while the city rushed awake, they were still on the balcony. Their silence wasn't the absence of words, it was fullness. Nathan ran his fingers through Lena's hair as if silently saying thank you. She smiled with her eyes closed, feeling the whole world fit right there, and thought, maybe love is this, permanence. Her grandmother appeared at the door with a blanket in her arms. It's getting cold, you two silly lovebirds. Lena ran to hug her, and Nathan joined. In that small house lived 3 generations of strength, and that morning nothing was missing. As they had breakfast together, the sounds of the street filled the background, vendors, children running, distant horns. But inside, there was only calm, the calm of those who no longer had anything to prove, of those who had learned that good love isn't loud, it's lived. Nathan looked at Lena and said, voice low and firm, "You taught me that love doesn't begin when everything is perfect. It begins when we choose to stay, even when life is still messy." She squeezed his hand, moved. "And you taught me that even the most guarded deserve to be seen." They didn't know what the future would bring, but they knew they had roots, and together they bloomed. And if someone ever asked how their story began, they wouldn't say, "It was love at first sight." They would say, "It was empathy, then truth, then choice, and finally, love." Not all love begins with flowers. Some begin with a simple gesture, a sincere look, or a sandwich offered without expecting anything in return. But the ones that stay, oh, those are made of courage, of daily choices, and the beauty of seeing the other exactly as they are. If this story touched your heart, moved you, or made you believe, even for a moment, that true love still exists. Like this video, it tells us stories like this still matter. Comment which scene moved you the most. Share it with someone who believes in the power of empathy, reconnection, and love that chooses to stay. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button and turn on notifications. Here, every story is made with soul, and every week, new emotions await to warm your heart and brighten your eyes.